Hey guys, welcome back. Last time we left off by making our request to the darksky.net or forecast.io. We parsed our information nicely, so we have the information that we need for our UI. Now we're gonna actually work on creating like the placeholders for all this information on the screen. Can actually just cut that out, and we're gonna be working on just an Xcode for this video. These little tabs let you open up and close some informational panes, and right now we just need the two sides. What we need to do is go to our storyboard. We can close this. Our storyboard is where we visually design our application. This is our main screen, our only screen. And down here where it says filter, you can go ahead and type in label. Label, you can see, is a variably sized amount of static text, essentially just text. That's how you put text on a phone screen. When you drag it around the screen, you can see these blue lines appear as guides of like where the center is. So just kind of have it centered somewhere in the middle, drop it in, and then we'll put in some sample text, which would be like a number. Let's say it's 65 degrees. So something you need to know about iOS, everything is done with constraints. Essentially, rather than saying like this is where I want 65 to go, you say where you want this label or 65 to go relative to the screen. The way you do that is with constraints. If you hit this bottom tab here that looks like two rectangles with the label selected, you can check this box horizontally in container, which basically says I want this to stay horizontally centered. If you hit add one constraint, you'll see this solid blue line show up, which means that no matter what happens, what screen size or whatever you're looking at, actually you can see it here on the bottom. You see it says iPhone 8. If we change it to, iPhone, whatever this is, iPhone 5, iPhone SE, iPad, this label that we created stays centered in the screen no matter what. So that's what constraints are for. If, for example, you can click here and actually remove this label. Let's see what happens when we do the same thing here. So right now it's centered on our iPad, and say I want to do it on an iPhone SE. You can see it's not even on the screen anymore. It's actually here. You can still see it because it's selected, but that's what happens when you don't have constraints. So I showed you one way, which was to do it from here. You can also here these numbers specify how far it is from each edge of the screen. It's another way of doing it. You can also do control, click and hold on the label, and you'll see this line is going to get dragged out. If you pull out and you let go on the screen, you can say center horizontally in safe area. The safe area is essentially the screen. It's just called a safe area because it takes into account like the status bar and things like that. So that's what we're going to do. Just click it and you'll get that same blue line. What we also want to do is, you can still see that our label is outlined in red. It's doing that to say that we're still missing something. You'll actually also see this yellow triangle up here. And if you hit the same looking yellow triangle on the left here, you'll see vertical position is ambiguous for 65. Or in other words, we don't know where the vertical position is supposed to be for 65. In most cases, it'll stay generally centered, but once you have a bunch of stuff on the screen, it's going to look weird. So to do that, we can control drag and towards the top to say top space to safe area, which will show this nice little like obvious indicator to show I'm going to keep this amount of space. You could also do that from here too. But just while we're building this UI, I'll be doing a few different methods just so you can see all of them. We'll put it back down to, let's say, the iPhone X screen size, just because it looks cool and it's new with the Xcode 9. So then when you click on the label itself, if you go down here, it's called Attributes Inspector. This little tab lets you mess with different things about each element on the screen. So in this case, we can click on this T here, bump up the size to, 40, hit enter. it'll get bigger, but it'll still say the same distance from the top, and it'll still say centered. That's why we set up constraints. In Android, there's different ways to do it in every type of in every situation where you make a user interface. There's different ways, but this is how you do it in Xcode. You just let the app know where everything is relative to the screen or to other things. All right, so now that we have this here, temperature label, we could also have like another label right under it. You can see we kind of already have it centered. This will be like our summary label, our general like sunny, rainy, whatever. I'll just call it summary right now. All these values are just placeholders. You can see this is off-centered. We can center it to the screen, or we can center it to something that we know is already centered. So if you do Control, press, and drag, you can see that you can highlight this other label that we have, the 65. And when you let go, you see there's center horizontally, vertical spacing, all types of stuff. To select more than one, which is what we want to do, you hold Shift and click center horizontally. And we also want the vertical spacing. So what we're doing is saying relative to the 65, the label 65, center it horizontally, left to right, and also keep the vertical spacing that we have currently. When you hit add constraints, while you can let go of the Shift button already, it'll apply this stuff. You can actually see that there's this little yellow dotted outline of where this label wants to be relative to where it is. And you can either drag it yourself. When the application runs, it'll do it. But if you want to see how it's going to look, you can hit this little refresh button here, and it'll actually snap over. So now that everything's blue, there's no yellow lines or anything, that means everything is working just fine. What else do we have? Let me remind myself here. We have the temperature, the summary, we have a time, and we also have a humidity. So let's do those real quick. We can keep dragging out labels. In this case, it wouldn't really make too much of a difference because they're not really detailed. But like, let's say the summary and the humidity label are going to be very similar. One way of copying or duplicating a label or any other element you have on the screen is to hold Option on your keyboard and then click and drag out, and you'll see you'll get an exact copy of it. So let's say if this one had like all types of colors and different fonts and sizes, you wouldn't have to repeat all those steps. So now that we drag this out, the first thing we should do is just change the name so we remember that we're dealing with something else. We can do the same thing again. We can say Control, press and drag to summary. Now we're going to hold Shift and hit center horizontally and vertical spacing again. Add the constraints and hit the refresh. So now each item you can see with the blue lines is relevant to each other, which is cool. So if for whatever reason I wanted to move this temperature over, if I put this change in like permanently, all of these would follow suit right after it. I can hit refresh to put it back where it's at. So you have to be careful about what you make relative to each other, just depending on how you want the screen layout to look. Let's do Option and then drag out one more of these just for the time. You can either double tap to edit text, or you can select the label and then go up here and type in what you want. So it'll be time. When you do it this way, you'll see that the space for it is way bigger than you need. A quick shortcut to resize it is to do Command and the equal sign, or Command and plus. You'll see it'll take care of itself. We're going to do the same thing as before. Control, press, and drag to something that you wanted your constraints to be relative to. Hit Shift to select more than one. Vertical spacing, center horizontally. Hit Add Constraints. Refresh, and we're centered. The next bit is something we haven't done yet. We're going to hit these two circles up here, which is the Assistant Editor. When you do that, what it does is it opens up the code that's for this screen. And I showed you earlier that if you click on this screen here and go to what's this called, the identity inspector, you'll see the corresponding code for this screen. So what we're going to do now is really cool. There's a lot of different ways that applications and things connect visual things to code. I think Xcode does a really cool job. If you hold Control and then click and drag, like we were doing before on our temperature label, you can pull it into the code itself. And now you have this connection. When you let go, you're going to have a connection between the code and the visualization, which is really cool. You can leave this as outlet. You give it a name. So I'm going to say temp label. Or maybe that sounds like temporary. So temperature label. Leave it as the type and click connect. So now we're going to do that for the rest of them. In general, this is how you just connect anything from your screen to the code. It's really great. It's really easy. There's a lot of different ways this happens. Like in Android development, it's completely different. But I think that's one big reason why I love storyboards and something that I kind of encourage people to use. You just keep clicking Control, press and drag. Say human label. Give it a name so you understand what it is, because it's going to be hard to tell what it is afterwards. Control, click and drag, and then call this time label. When you have them both open, it's actually kind of easy to see what they're referencing to. If you hover over these circles, it'll actually highlight what it's referring to. And then what we're going to do real quick before the end of this video is go ahead and say, remember to use self, because this stuff is outside of this little block of code, so it's going to complain that it doesn't know what you're talking about. You can say temperature label, hit tab to let it autocomplete, or enter, or don't. Okay, and then we're going to do dot, which accesses all the things that you can do with this text label, which is a lot we're going to go over. But what we want to do is change the text. The way we do that is by giving it some text. Now, I'm actually in the wrong area here. We're under time, so let me change this to time label. It'd be nice if you could just say temperature label, time label equals current time, the same way we were setting it before. If you try to do this, there's going to be an issue. The issue being, actually move this over. Issue being, it says cannot assign a value of integer to type string. Now it's expecting a string because that's what text is, and a quick and dirty way to do that is by doing this. Open a couple quotation marks, hit this backward slash, and then a couple of open and close parentheses. This is how you generally put variables into strings. So like if I wanted to say the current time is, and then this is how you would put a variable into code. There's also other ways to do this, but this is like the easiest way to do it. This is the method that I use all the time. So we could actually leave it like this, but maybe later we'll do that. Right now I'm just going to use that to turn this integer into a string. So now it's not complaining because it expects a string. Anything in these quotation marks is considered a string, and this backslash and parentheses is how you put anything other than a string into a string. So we're going to do the same thing here, except for the summary label, it's expecting a string just like before, but summary actually is a string, so we can just directly put it in. We don't have to change it. For the next ones, it is going to be complained because these are doubles and not strings. So we're going to do the same thing. Quotation, backslash, open parentheses. We'll type in what we want to put in. It's going to stay red until you close out that parentheses. Perfect. And then self dot humid, what do we call it? Humid label dot text. And there's these little short descriptions that are helpful some of the time, usually most of the time. The current text that is displayed by the label. That's exactly what we need. That's what we're changing. And then we can say current humid. Perfect. So now, this time we're going to click play. Oh, there you go. I made a mistake. So it's going to say build failed. You can click on this red here to see why. Cannot assign value of type double, it's type string. Same issue as before, I just forgot to convert it. When you click on it, it'll take you to it. And we know what to do here. Just throw it into a string with a special modifier around it, and it'll work fine. Hit play. This time it won't fail, but it's okay. I kind of made this video series in mind with hoping to make some mistakes, and so anybody's watching can see, common solutions to common mistakes rather than a perfectly curated and planned out video tutorial. There you go. We got information. It's on the screen now. It matches this information that was here. What we have to do next is make it pretty. Add some graphics, add some images, maybe an icon, which we get back here actually as an icon to be clear night. And then I'm going to go through some of the documentation of the next video, in the next video of this API, where it lets you know like what are the potential values of these keys. And specifically for something like an icon, it'll say like all the different variations of the type of icon that it's going to return, and that way you can have like a sun for a sunny day or a cloud with rain coming out for a rainy day, so you can be prepared for every potential icon that it might be returned. Anyway, so good job on this video. We got our UI set up. You learned how to put things on the screen with constraints so they look good on all different types of screen sizes. You learned how to connect things on the screen, in this case labels or text labels, with your code, how to change them when you get information, and so far we've made a lot of steps, and I think this is only the 5th video towards making this app. Most of the rest of it is just a lot of visual cleanup, and if we want, we can get more information for like weekly weather and have like a 10-day forecast or something along those lines. I'll see you in the next video. We're going to clean this up. We're going to make it look a lot nicer, and we're going to continue using this information to make this application.